This one is tough. It's one of those deep dives that, you hope you never have to do. But sometimes the stories we cover here are tough. And this is definitely one of those. This is the story of Chastity Sparkman,
Yeah.
from Sacramento. And she was just 26 years old, a young mother of two. And her case really shook the community.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that makes it so hard to grasp is that she was killed on Valentine's Day night
Oh, wow.
in a place you'd think would be safe. A busy shopping center parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that you would be safe in a public place like that, especially on a holiday.
Right, exactly. And so that's what we're going to unpack today, not just the events of that night, but really try to understand, what led up to it, what were the warning signs, were there things that maybe seemed small at the time, but were actually pointing to a much larger pattern?
Yeah, and that's the thing about these tragedies is that they don't just happen out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's usually a pattern of escalating behavior,
Hmm.
and the better we understand those patterns, the better chance we have of, intervening before it's too late.
Okay, so let's talk about Chastity before we get into the tragic
Mm.
details. I kind of want to paint a picture of who she was, what her life was like. She came from a big family,
Okay.
like a really big family, 20 siblings.
Wow.
And everyone says that she was the glue that held them all together.
That's something that we see a lot in the backgrounds of, individuals who become victims of abuse.
Mhm.
They're often the caretakers, the peacemakers, the ones who, prioritize harmony in their relationships.
Mhm.
And sadly, those very traits can make them more susceptible to manipulation.
So she's this really caring person. She's working hard to build a good life for herself and her family. She
Mm.
had her own business. She was going to college.
Wow, that's great.
And of course, her two little ones, Zai and Priscilla, they were her world. And she even had this philosophy about parenting that I just
Yeah.
loved. She would say, I'm not raising kids, I'm raising future adults.
Yeah.
I love that.
I know, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it really speaks to her strength and her, kind of forward-thinking approach to life and parenting.
And it's so sad because in a way that strength, that focus on empowerment, it contrasts so sharply with the behavior of her ex-husband, Isaiah James.
Right.
It's almost like he saw her strength as a threat,
Yeah.
something to be subdued.
Yeah, that's unfortunately a common theme that we see in these cases, that the abuser often feels threatened by the strength and independence of their partner.
So let's talk about Isaiah. They
Yeah.
they were high school sweethearts,
Okay.
the kind of couple everyone just assumed would be together forever.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've read, it seems like it really was a fairy tale romance, at least in the beginning. But, somewhere along the line, things took a very dark turn.
And this is where it's so important to look beyond the surface to understand that abuse can really simmer beneath,
Mm.
a seemingly perfect facade.
In fact, abusers are often very skilled at creating that charming initial impression. It's part of the manipulation tactic.
So things start to unravel when Isaiah ends up in prison. Now, the exact nature of his offenses isn't totally clear from the sources that you sent,
Yep.
but what is clear is that this period of separation, yeah, him being incarcerated, marked a real shift in their relationship.
Yeah, makes sense.
And we can see this most clearly in their jailhouse phone calls.
Mhm.
You go from these loving conversations about their kids and plans for the future to ones filled with accusations and attempts to control Chastity's actions, even just like her everyday decisions.
Think about it. When you're incarcerated, you're cut off from the world. Your sense of power and control is completely stripped away.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for abusers to try and regain that control by manipulating their partners on the outside.
And it's like this vicious cycle. The more Chastity tried to build a stable life for herself and her kids,
Yeah.
the more threatened Isaiah felt. It's this twisted irony. She's doing everything right. She's being responsible. She's taking care of her family. And it's somehow perceived as a betrayal.
And that's the insidious nature of abuse.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
often triggered by the very things that should be celebrated, independence, growth, success.
Right.
The abuser's insecurity masks itself as possessiveness.
Yeah.
And that can escalate quickly, particularly in situations where there's already a power imbalance,
Right.
like with incarceration.
And then just to make things even more complicated, while Isaiah was still in prison,
Mhm.
he starts a new relationship with a woman named Anaba Burgos.
Wow.
And yet he's still fixated on controlling Chastity.
Yeah, this is a crucial point. It speaks to a common dynamic we see in these cases. The presence of a new partner can actually heighten the risk.
Really?
Because think about it, the abuser feels a loss of control, a fear of being replaced.
Yeah.
And that can lead to, a very dangerous escalation in attempts to reassert dominance over the former partner.
So you've got this powder keg situation. Isaiah's about to be released.
Hmm.
Anab's in the picture. And Chastity's caught right in the middle.
Yeah, not good.
So I guess the question is, what could possibly go wrong?
Right, and that's what we're going to explore, how this already volatile situation led to the events of that devastating Valentine's Day night.
Now, you might be wondering why Chastity would even agree to meet Isaiah, especially on Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
It does.
You would think she would just want to steer clear.
Yeah, and that's where the manipulation comes in. Abusers often exploit shared responsibilities like childcare arrangements to
Oh.
lure their victims into contact.
Yeah.
It's a way to make the interaction seem necessary, even benign.
Right.
And for someone like Chastity, who clearly prioritized her children above all else,
Yeah.
it's understandable why she might have felt obligated to meet.
So she agreed to meet him, but she wasn't naive. She chose what she thought was a safe public place, the Lake Crest Village shopping center. She figured the crowds, the presence of security cameras, it would deter any trouble.
This is a tragic misconception that we see all too often. Public spaces can offer this false sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
Abusers don't always follow a script,
Right.
and their actions can be impulsive and unpredictable, especially when they're fueled by jealousy or anger.
So here's what happened that night. It was around 11:15 p.m. Chastity arrived at the shopping center expecting to discuss, co-parenting arrangements with Isaiah. What she didn't know was that he had brought Anab along.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that right there is a huge red flag.
Right.
The fact that he brought his new girlfriend to a meeting that was supposed to be about their children,
Yeah.
it really speaks volumes about his intentions.
Exactly.
This wasn't about co-parenting. This was about power and control.
And just moments later, gunshots rang out, shattering that, Valentine's Day atmosphere. Witnesses described, chaos and panic as shoppers scrambled for cover. Security cameras captured the horrifying scene. Isaiah firing the gun, Chastity collapsing to the ground.
It's chilling to think about how quickly a seemingly ordinary public space can transform into a scene of violence.
Yeah.
It reminds us that domestic violence doesn't discriminate.
Right.
It can erupt anywhere at any time.
Emergency responders rushed Chastity to the hospital, but tragically she didn't survive. And just like that, the two young children lost their mother. A family was shattered, and a community was left grappling with the unimaginable.
The emotional impact of such a sudden and violent loss is immeasurable.
Yeah.
And for children like Zai and Priscilla, who were so young,
Yeah.
processing this trauma is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It's a wound that can take years, even a lifetime to heal.
And Isaiah and Anab, they fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of devastation and sparking a month-long manhunt that would span multiple states.
This escape and its duration
Yeah.
raises some serious questions. Was this a spontaneous act fueled by momentary rage? Or was there an element of premeditation?
Right.
Were there plans in place, resources at their disposal, perhaps even a support network aiding their escape?
Right.
These are all questions investigators would be grappling with.
And what about Anab's role in all of this? Initially, it might be easy to dismiss her as simply a bystander, caught up in a situation she couldn't control.
Mhm.
But the reality, as we'll see, is far more complex.
Yeah, it's rarely that simple.
Right.
There's always more to the story.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The fact that her relationship with Isaiah started while he was still in prison,
Right.
that's a pretty big red flag right there.
Yeah.
I mean, it suggests that she was willing to, engage in a relationship that already had all these, power imbalances and control issues.
And it makes you wonder, right? Like, was she drawn to that in some way?
This pause.
Did she see it as, exciting or validating in some, twisted way?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. And it's something we see more often than we'd like to admit. There's a certain allure for some people to be associated with someone who exerts power,
Yeah.
even if that power is rooted in violence or control.
But they want to feel untouchable, right?
Exactly. It feeds into this dangerous fantasy of being, above the law.
And it's disturbing to think about, but it's so important to understand that accomplices, they're not always these passive bystanders.
Right.
They can play a very active role in the cycle of abuse.
Absolutely. And legally speaking, an accomplice can be held just as responsible for the crime as the person who physically committed it.
Wow.
Their involvement might include, planning, providing support, or even just encouraging the abuser's actions.
So, Chastity's story, it's so important for all of us because it forces us to, confront these uncomfortable truths about domestic violence
Yeah.
and to acknowledge that it can happen anywhere to anyone and it's not always as, clear cut as we might think. Yeah.
Exactly. And what's particularly important is that we learn to recognize the patterns.
Mm.
Those subtle red flags that might seem insignificant on their own,
Yeah.
but when you view them together, they paint a very disturbing picture.
Okay, so let's talk about those red flags. What are some of the things that people should be aware of, not just in their own relationships, but also in the lives of, their friends and loved ones?
Well, one of the most common and insidious tactics is isolation.
Okay.
The abuser will try to cut their partner off from support systems, friends, family colleagues,
Yeah.
anyone who might offer, a different perspective or encourage independence.
And we saw that with Isaiah, right? He was constantly questioning Chastity's friendships, her social media activity, even her decision to go back to school.
Right.
It's like he wanted her world to revolve entirely around him.
Exactly. And that's a classic control tactic.
Yeah.
By limiting their partner's contact with the outside world,
Yeah.
they create a sense of dependency,
Mm-hmm.
making it harder for the victim to escape.
And and it's not just about physical isolation either, right?
Right.
Abusers also use emotional manipulation
Right.
to, kind of wear down their partner's self-esteem and make them doubt their own perceptions.
Think about it. You're constantly being told you're wrong, that you're overreacting,
Yeah.
that your feelings are invalid over time, that can really erode your sense of self-worth
Mm-hmm.
and make you more reliant on the abuser for validation.
And they'll use these phrases, right? Like, if you really loved me or you're making me do this.
Exactly. It's all about shifting the blame
Yeah.
and making the victim feel responsible for the abuser's actions.
And as we saw in Chastity's case, this controlling behavior, it often escalates when the abuser feels a loss of power or control. When Isaiah was released from prison and Chastity was really focusing on building her own life, her business, her education,
Yeah.
his possessiveness and jealousy, it just intensified.
Absolutely. And the presence of a new partner like an ab
Right.
can further fuel that insecurity and rage.
It's like that primal instinct, if I can't have you, no one can.
Exactly.
So what can we do? What can people do if they see these warning signs, these red flags, in their own relationships or in the lives of their loved ones?
Well, the first step is always awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The more we understand about the dynamics of abuse,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to recognize the signs and intervene.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, intervention doesn't always have to be confrontational.
Right.
It can be as simple as reaching out, offering support, letting the person know they're not alone.
It's about creating a space where they feel safe to talk, to
Yeah.
share their experiences without judgment, because often the biggest hurdle for victims of abuse is overcoming that sense of shame and isolation.
You're absolutely right. Shame thrives in silence.
Yeah.
By opening up the conversation, by acknowledging that this is a problem that affects, countless individuals and families,
Right.
we can start to chip away at that stigma and create a more supportive environment.
And if you're in a situation where you feel unsafe, where you're experiencing abuse, please know that there is help available.
Mm.
There are organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline that can provide support, guidance, and resources to help you get to a place of safety.
You don't have to go through this alone.
Right.
There are people who understand what you're going through, who can offer a lifeline in a time of crisis.
One thing that keeps coming up for me is the fact that Chastity thought meeting in a public place would ensure her safety.
Yeah.
But as we saw, that wasn't enough.
It's a harsh reminder that public spaces, while offering a sense of visibility, don't always guarantee protection.
Right.
Abusers can be unpredictable,
Mm-hmm.
and their actions often escalate quickly.
So what can we do to make public spaces safer? I mean, this happened in a busy shopping center.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think something like that could happen there.
And that's precisely why this conversation is so important.
Yeah.
We need to challenge our assumptions about safety and start
Mhm.
thinking critically about the environments we create.
Yeah.
It's about being proactive, about identifying potential vulnerabilities and implementing strategies to mitigate those risks.
So we're talking about things like better lighting, increased security patrols, maybe even designated safe zones for, custody exchanges and meetings with ex-partners.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical changes to the environment.
Right.
It's also about fostering a sense of community where
Yeah.
people feel connected and look out for one another.
It's almost like we need to create this culture of proactive vigilance.
Yeah.
Where we're all aware of our surroundings and willing to step in if we see something that seems amiss.
That's a great way to put it. We need to shift from a mindset of passive observation to one of active engagement.
Yeah.
We need to be upstanders, not bystanders.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you? I mean, this is a lot to take in. It's heavy stuff.
It is heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly important. Chastity's story is a stark reminder that domestic violence can happen anywhere to anyone.
Right.
It's not just a private matter. It's a societal issue that requires our collective attention and action.
So what can you do right now in your own life to make a difference?
Well, first thing is to educate yourself about the signs of domestic violence. We've talked about some of the red flags to watch for. Share this information with your friends, family, colleagues. The more people who are aware of these patterns,
Yeah.
the better equipped we'll be to intervene and prevent tragedies like this from happening.
And don't be afraid to speak up if you have concerns. It might feel awkward or uncomfortable, but it could literally save someone's life.
You're absolutely right. Silence is often the abuser's greatest weapon.
Mm-hmm.
By speaking out, we break that silence and create a space for healing and support.
This is a really powerful message, and I think it's one that bears repeating. Speak up, reach out, offer support. You never know what impact your words or actions might have.
And remember, you're not alone. There are organizations and resources available to help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great place to start. They offer confidential support and can connect you with local resources.
It's amazing to think that Chastity's story, which began with such unimaginable tragedy, has the power to create positive change. It's a testament to her spirit and to the resilience of her family and community.
And it reminds us that even in the face of darkness, there's always hope. There's always the possibility of healing, of growth, of creating a world where violence is no longer tolerated.
It's been really heavy, talking about Chastity's story and how it really brings to light this whole issue of domestic violence. It's heartbreaking, but, in a way, it's also a catalyst for having these really important conversations about what we can do to create safer communities. So as you're hearing all of this, are you thinking about places in your own life maybe where you or someone might be vulnerable?
Yeah, it's natural, I think, to start reflecting on our own experiences and our surroundings when we're, confronted with a story like Chastity's.
Right.
I think we often just go about our daily lives. We go to the same parks, the same stores, even libraries, and we just assume a certain level of safety.
Right.
But this case really forces us to question those assumptions and to think critically about what makes a space truly safe.
Yeah, and after the shooting, the community really rallied around Chastity's family. There was a memorial service fundraising for her children's education, just a real outpouring of support.
That's wonderful.
But there was also a lot of discussion about, how could something so horrific happen in such a seemingly safe place?
Right.
And it's made me think a lot about, the specific steps that we can take to make those public spaces that we rely on safer for everyone.
And that's where the conversation needs to go, right? From awareness to action.
Exactly.
And it starts with recognizing that safety isn't just about luck or chance.
Yeah.
It's about design. It's about community engagement.
Right. It's about a collective commitment to looking out for one another.
Okay, so what can we actually do? Like, what are some concrete changes that can be made to deter violence and create, a more secure environment?
Well, sometimes the most effective solutions are the simplest.
Mm.
Better lighting, for example, can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
A well-lit area is just less inviting to someone who's looking to commit a crime, and it provides a greater sense of security for those using this space.
Right. It's like taking away that cover of darkness that allows people with bad intentions to blend in.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. Think about landscaping. Overgrown bushes and trees, while they might look nice, can actually create hiding places for potential attackers. So regular trimming and maintenance not only improve visibility, but also reduce the risk of ambush.
Wow. I never really thought about it that way. But it's so true. It's amazing how something as simple as trimming a bush can actually make a difference. So what else can we do? Security cameras are another important tool. We saw how crucial they were in Chastity's case, helping to identify the perpetrators and track their movements. So strategic placement of cameras, especially in parking lots, entryways, and other high-traffic areas, can act as a powerful deterrent.
So it's not just about having them, it's about putting them in the right places where they'll be most effective.
Exactly. But technology can only take us so far. We also need to cultivate a sense of community where people feel empowered to look out for one another and report suspicious activity. Neighborhood watch programs, community patrols.
Yeah.
Even just being present and aware of your surroundings can make a big difference.
It's about creating that culture of shared responsibility, right? Like, we can't just rely on law enforcement to handle everything. We all have a role to play.
You got it. When communities come together, when we're all invested in each other's well-being, that's when real change happens. That's when
Yeah.
we start to create a truly safe environment, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
So, what can you, as our listener, do to be proactive about safety?
Start by being observant. Pay attention to your surroundings. Are there areas with poor lighting or visibility? Are there places where someone could easily hide or ambush another person? Don't hesitate to report these concerns to the appropriate authorities, whether it's the property owner, the city council, or the police.
Yeah.
You might feel like you're overreacting, but it's always better to err on the side of caution.
What if you see something that just doesn't feel right, like someone loitering in a parking lot or following someone too closely? What should you do?
Trust your gut if something feels off. It probably is. Don't be afraid to call the police or alert security personnel. It might be nothing, but it could also be something important. And remember, you're not intervening directly. You're simply reporting a potential issue and letting those trained to handle these situations take over.
This has been an incredibly difficult deep dive, but it's also been incredibly important. Chastity's story is a tragic reminder that domestic violence is a pervasive issue, one that demands our attention and action.
Yeah. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem, but it's crucial to remember that even small actions can have a ripple effect by speaking up, by being vigilant, by supporting those who are vulnerable. We can create a safer world for ourselves and for generations to come.
If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that you're not alone. There are resources available to help. You can find information on the National Domestic Violence Hotline and other support services in our show notes. And as always, thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.